This is Oklahoma Inside Out, a weekly broadcast of Cimarron Alliance that focuses on the issues, culture, and people important to LGBT Oklahomans. And now, here's your host for Oklahoma Inside Out, Scott J. Hamilton.
Hi, and welcome to this very special edition of Oklahoma Inside Out. Several times a year, we do a live audience edition of our show, and this one is a particularly interesting one because we are on the stage of the City Rep Theater here in Oklahoma City, talking about a very important piece of theater. Now, our regular listeners will know that we've done several shows this year about theater events in Oklahoma City and in the metro area. That's because we've been seeing a lot of great theater that's important to the LGBT community in particular, but also in terms of educating and informing the general public. We are so happy with some of the shows that have been mounted this year. None perhaps so much as this one. Today we're going to be talking about the Normal Heart that City Rep is mounting the second and third weekend of November. We've got a great panel with us this evening, and I'm delighted that you are watching on YouTube and you are listening on the internet. And this, once again, is Oklahoma Inside Out. I want to introduce our panel. Before I do that, though, I have to tell you that I feel so much like James Lipton tonight inside the Actors Studio. I would have had more cards if I had thought about that, but just being here with such talent makes me think of all kinds of things like, what's your favorite smell? But we'll instead focus on the show. Beginning right here at my nearest to my left is Don Jordan, the artistic director of City Rep. Don and I have known each other not very long, and yet it feels like we've been friends for a very long time. We're very much aligned in terms of building community and informing people and entertaining people, and always a pleasure to visit with you.
Glad to be back, my friend.
And Michael Jones, an Emmy Award-winning actor and an integral part of this show. We spoke a month or so ago when we were on Oklahoma Inside Out, just the audio edition, and I so enjoyed the depth that you bring to this show and the insight that you have. So welcome once again to Oklahoma Inside Out, Michael.
Thank you.
And this man probably needs no real introduction to Oklahoma City theater goers. Jonathan Beck Reed, a multi-talented performer and someone who has given so much to Oklahoma City in the arts, has been a mainstay and continues to be, and it's really wonderful to have you with us this evening as well.
It is so good to be here. Thank you for
having me. I'm going to start first with you, Don, because when I began by saying that this is somewhat risky. This is a show about AIDS, and that by itself could, it's like, oh God, I don't want to deal with that now. We just had Halloween, Thanksgiving's coming up. And yet you chose right now to do this show. Why?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One, within the theater world, just last year it was on Broadway, where it won Tony Awards, and its revival was highly acclaimed. It won multiple Tony Awards for both performance and for best play. So it was, within the theater world, it was current in the vocabulary. This was the slot where it fit well for us, and this slot, chronologically in the larger sense, is right by October, the Gay Awareness Month, and November, which is part of an annual tradition that we do at our theater, Broadway Cares and Equity Fights AIDS, where for many years we've done an appeal for our show that fell nearest to that. And we're part of the whole national family of actors. Equity theaters all over the country, professional theaters, from Broadway, regional theaters like ours, small theaters, dinner theater, all of them, they do different kinds of appeals. Bake sales, asking for money after the show, signing posters and autograph on Broadway, all those kinds of things to raise money for Broadway Cares and Equity Fights AIDS. In the early days of the AIDS crisis in New York, which the play deals with, when unconscionably many people did not respond to the crisis in its early days, part of the subject matter of the play itself, I'm really proud that our community in Actors Equity, we banded together to do something. We happy few, we band of brothers. We created new traditions in the theater. Instead of opening night gifts, we gave gifts to equity fights AIDS in each other's names. We created things like that. And now, across the country, we raise more than $10 million a year, every year. From broke actors, mind you. Yeah. I'm so proud of that, you know. While, of course, that's shoelaces for 15 minutes at the Pentagon, that's a huge, huge amount of money. And it has grown every year. And the good faith effort is wonderful every year. You see in the national newspaper of the theater, the Equity News, they'll have features about theaters, large and small, and the many efforts that they do. And it's some of the large things on Broadway. You know, Hugh Jackman, after his one-man show, sold his sweaty shirt, which somebody bought for $42,000.
That was me.
Yes, apparently he could have got 106 if he would have come with the shirt. But you know, but just that kind of thing. The actors are creative and wonderful, and they do it in many different ways.
And this is over 30 years of this kind of fundraising.
Yes, and for our community locally in Oklahoma, we actually received more money from that than we raised because, of course, we have so few professional theaters. There are us and our good friends at the Lyric Theater here and a brand new small theater in Tulsa that has just achieved professional status. But that's it for the whole state. So the kind of research money, the kind of money that comes here is more generous to us than what we're able to raise. But in good conscience, we want to do our part.
Absolutely. And I mentioned that this is over 30 years now. You were in New York during the time that this play was set.
Actually,
Michael,
all three of us.
Jonathan, you as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes all four of us.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I'd like for you to talk a little bit, Michael, about what it's been like for you to be a part of this show and how much of your own experience has been brought right back to the forefront by working on this show.
It's actually been very, there are ghosts, and it's been a time of remembrance and a time of recalling what it was to be a gay man in New York City in 1981 through 85, when the virus was finally discovered. And the unrest and the constant fear that you lived with, that you were a walking time bomb ready to explode. It's been uncomfortable. It's been, as I said, there are ghosts. The memories of the people that I lost are with me at every rehearsal. And I'm very proud that we're doing this, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
You know, I think that anytime that we're able to bring those experiences into our work, and it doesn't at all have to be on the stage, it can be whatever line of work we're in, those extremely personal experiences, those losses, it does, or it should, I think at least, have a profound impact on us. Looking at the variety of roles, Jonathan, that you have played, especially here in Oklahoma City, how has preparing for this one differed than perhaps some of the others?
I think in a technical sense, they're all the same. But in an emotional way, you have to connect your emotions to the characters you're playing. And as you said, we were all in New York when this happened, and we lost many, many friends. And it was a very dark and difficult time to be heterosexual, because I grew up in the theater. Most of my friends were gay, and many that we lost. You know, you were there from the beginning, so you saw this kind of odd thing happening, and nobody could quite explain what it was. And you know, people thought it was just like a cold or a flu, and then it just didn't get any better. And just one by one, you would see these people that meant so much to you just vanish. And a lot of people are carrying a great deal of guilt with them because your survival instinct kicks in, and you start to understand the enormity of this disease and what it's doing. And I had a friend who jumped out of a window and took his life because no one would come to his apartment and help him, and because they didn't know if they would catch it by just entering the room. So it's what I am able to bring to this, and it is difficult. As Michael said, it's difficult. This character that I'm playing is driven by passion, but he's sometimes a very ugly man. He's not smooth. He's not finessed. He's not a politician. He's a person who is terrified and desperate, and he's a drowning man who's just trying to get air. And he'll do whatever he can to sort of rattle those cages and slap people in the face and try to wake them up. And he really was a voice in the dark, even among his own community, because at that time so many people did not want to come out of the closet. You know, they didn't know how they would be accepted, and they were many of the men who were helping him fight this fight in the beginning. And so it was, and he was out, you know.
I think you should say who he is, Larry.
He is Larry Kramer. I'm sorry, you're right. Larry Kramer is Ned Weeks. They are one and the same.
The play is very thinly fictionalized for what I'm sure were reasons of protecting the privacy of some people and also the legal ramifications of a story that is so sprawling and involves so many people living and dead and their estates. Mm-hmm. So, and at that time, have been changed, and yet it resonates with the kind of truth.
Right.
There are certain things, there are certain monologues. You hear Hamlet give a monologue, and that's great, but you don't think, well, okay, that really happened to a guy yesterday with his father and the poison in his ear. You know, it's a play. But you hear stories in this play, and you just know, your sense of truth tells you that happened just that way to a human being.
We'll be back right after this break.
My name is Kelly Killiante Forbes, your Mr. Gay Oklahoma US of A 2011. I'm a member of Cimarron Alliance, and it's a very, very good investment, and I encourage you to also join. It's only $25 a year. Go ahead and visit on www.cimarronalliance.org. Once again, Kelly Killiante Forbes, and don't forget, together we're better.
With the mainstream media focused on the presidential election, who's keeping an eye on things right here in Oklahoma? The Oklahoma Observer. For over 44 years, the Oklahoma Observer has been providing news, commentary, and analysis that is simply not available anywhere else. We hold lawmakers responsible to the very Oklahomans they are elected to serve. That's why the Oklahoma Observer is so important to LGBT Oklahomans and their allies. When you can't rely on political rhetoric and the mainstream media, rely on the Oklahoma Observer. Our only agenda is to provide critical news for critical thinkers. Visit us today at www.okobserver.net.
Welcome back to Oklahoma Inside Out. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, and we have a wonderful, wonderful collection of guests on our program this week. Typically, our show, we have one person in our studio, maybe two, but tonight we're talking with three people who are very important in terms of culture here in Oklahoma City. Jonathan and Michael were talking first about Larry Kramer, and then Don chimed in. We need to take a step back, I think, because as I think about this show, for many, many people in Oklahoma City today, many theater goers, Larry Kramer is not a name that resonates, particularly, or rather even in the LGBT community. That's something that was way back. So let's talk a little bit about Larry Kramer and what happened to energize him in some of the work that he did that would eventually be a part of this play.
He was an author, a writer. He wrote films, he wrote theater, he wrote books. The book that he wrote, was it just Faggot? Was that what it was called?
Mm-hmm. Faggots.
Faggots was an enormous hit. It was kind of like a Daniel Steele novel, you know, among the gay community, but also by extension everybody. It was just a terrific book. He was a wonderful writer, and at the onset of he had money. He was independently well off, comfortable, and so,
which of course makes a life in the arts so much easier.
Well, and it also provided him a microphone. You know, he had a voice. He didn't have to worry so much about how he would be perceived or if he would get his next job. He was known for being homosexual. He was known for writing about, writing material. So I mean, he didn't have to be afraid of anyone, and he was fearless. And he even talks in the play, talks about weakness terrifies me. So he was a very strong, outspoken person. And when this started to happen, among his friends, and he started to see it happen. He went to see a doctor. What's her real name? What's the name of the real doctor? Do you remember?
No,
There's a doctor in the play, played wonderfully by Stacey Logan.
Linda
Stacey
Laubenstein.
Lewis. What was her
Linda
name?
Laubenstein.
Linda Laubenstein.
Laubenstein.
She was treating all these friends of his, these patients. So he went to see her and he said, "What's going on? You know, explain it to me." And she did, as best she knew at the time. So she sort of recruited him and said, "Somebody's got to get out there and do this. Can't be me, because, you know, the medical community will think I'm a quack, you know. So somebody like you needs to get out there and talk about this." And, you know, and so he did. He sort of assembled a group of people, which became the Gay Men's
Health
Crisis.
GMHC.
He was the founder. Although, because even with his group of friends, he was so outspoken, he was not elected the first president. They picked a friend of his who they thought would be a better easier face, a better PR face.
And he was eventually kicked out of the group that he started.
Yes.
And it was a very ugly and unceremonious removal.
Yeah, in terms of the human dimension of his character, he himself is a gadfly, still very much alive, and one of the interesting facets of the story is that those elements that were very destructive in a way, you know, to be asked to leave the organization that you yourself founded, to be that kind of thing, there was a way in which he was very abrasive, but those same characteristics gave him the strength to be a singular voice when he truly stood all alone, when he, in the face of everyone's naysaying or opposition or just lack of enthusiasm or not caring, he continued forward. So it's an interesting question, and one of those questions you can never have an answer in life. You know, if he was a little nicer, might he have got along better? Or if he was a little nicer, might he not have saved millions of lives?
And I think that is an unanswered question.
It's a fascinating dichotomy about the play, just as theater, as well as the fact that it's our collective history in our country.
And we don't even, those questions, I don't think, as playing this role, are entirely answered because he wrote the play. So it's from his perspective,
Right.
and it's his words, and it's what didn't he include, you know?
After being kicked out of the Gay Men's Health Crisis, he started a militant arm. ACT UP. And I was in New York and at that initial meeting for ACT UP, and it was very exciting, very moving, very. You felt empowered all of a sudden. There was something to do.
I didn't. I felt terrified. I did. I felt terrified.
Of course.
And I mean,
everyone did.
I'm a young man from Oklahoma,
Yes.
still not out, and it's like, oh no, this, I don't want my parents to see this on the evening news. This is not. And yet, were it not for the work of those people in ACT UP, who's to say where we would be with medications today, or with hospital treatments? I mean, we can't say enough about those people who said, "To hell with it. I've lost everything."
Right.
And this is me, and I'm not gonna stand for this.
And many among the group were sick initially, so they felt they had nothing to lose, you know. And it was, I had a friend, a guy named Rob Warrenoff, who I don't think is with us anymore. And Rob was one of the most militant, and he was very adamant about outing people. And the more well-known they were, the more important it was to him to discover that and to go against any wishes they might have and to exploit them. And that created even more division, you know, among the community, because there were people who absolutely, especially celebrities, who did not want, they wanted to come out on their own terms. And so Larry Kramer, I mean, moved from one group to another and became even more of a pariah. So it's sad in a way. I mean, because anytime you play a role, you have to love the character you play. And I've been around Larry Kramer in New York, you know, for many events and things, and had seen him in action. And he was always angry, always, even among friends, you know, even among people who revered him and looked up to him. He was always beating a podium and always screaming, and the veins were always popping out of his neck. And he was always like a man shouting to the wind. And so it's easy for me as I do this to see how he became so ostracized. But at the same time, it's also easy to see why he was essential in the grand scheme of things, why he had to be who he was and do the things he did. Because you can't prove a negative. No. You can't say, well, it would have been different if he weren't there.
That is one of the fascinating aspects of the story. Yeah. I mean, he reminds me of Dylan Thomas, you know.
Well, and
do
how
not
ordinary.
go gentle unto that good night. Rage against the dying of the light. Were it not for his rage, were it not for his unhappiness, were it not for his suffering, how many more lives might have been lost? And it's just a fascinating and unanswerable question, which of course makes great theater.
Sure it does.
It's riveting, you know, and then the human cost of the play.
Yeah.
For me, that's there's a kind of quiet power to this story that will resonate. Of course, it does with all of us because we lived it. But even for the generation who comes after, for whom we are telling history, not personal experience, you just watch scene after scene in a way that was very similar to how we lived it. This friend got sick, we lost this friend, we lost 5, and then it was 20, and then it was 100, and then it was 200, and you've lost count of how many friends you have lost, and it's like there's this silent war that was going on. That's what the 80s felt like to me. Yeah. You just, every time you came back to a theater that you had worked at and hadn't been there for 6 months and somebody wasn't there, there's just someone else missing.
Or a boutique or a restaurant or a bar or and you were afraid to ask where someone was
exactly.
Because so often you knew.
You knew what the answer would be. And what's fascinating to me is that all Larry Kramer wanted to be, and he says it in the play, I just want to be ordinary. He doesn't want to be a screamer. He doesn't want to be rattling cages. He just wants to be ordinary. He wants to be like everybody else. He wants us all to be the same. And it's really a fascinating thing because a lot of people believe that he just wants celebrity, that it's all about him. He's accused of that in the play. One of the reasons he attained a certain level of celebrity was because none of the co-founders would go on television. They wouldn't do interviews. And so by default he would, and so they thought there was a real contingent that thought he was creating more of a panic to become a celebrity because it was like his identity. And it's funny when you read about him at any depth, you realize he just wanted to be ordinary. And
it's that ordinariness that I want to pick back up on. We're coming up on a break, but we've got so much more to talk about the characters and about the play.
This edition of Oklahoma Inside Out is made possible through the generosity of friends and supporters like you. To support this program and the advancement of equal rights for LGBT Oklahomans, please consider making a generous gift today at CimarronAlliance.org.
One of the most important things you can do for yourself and for those you love is to know your HIV status. Knowing your status means you can live a healthy, productive, and happy life. HIV testing is quick, confidential, and in most cases, it's free. For testing locations in Oklahoma, dial 211 today.
Welcome back to a very special edition of Oklahoma Inside Out. We are in the Little Theater at Civic Center Music Hall in Oklahoma City talking about City Rep's upcoming show, The Normal Heart by Larry Kramer. And I want to go back to something that, Don, you began to move us down a road a moment ago that I really want us to look at. And I said at the beginning that this is a historical piece. And in some ways, that's absolutely true. Other ways, it's continues to be a part of people's lives. Our regular listeners will know that because I've talked often about how my husband Wayne has been living now with AIDS for over 30 years.
That's remarkable.
It is remarkable. But this isn't history for him or other people like him. This is a continuation of the story. I'd like for us to look at what this play, and particularly what this play being produced in Oklahoma City, can do to speak to a younger audience that doesn't have any of this experience, that the only thing that they see about HIV and AIDS is that you can take 3 pills a day and you can climb mountains. At least those are the pictures that you see for the meds in magazines. What can this play do to inject a jolt of reality about something that is not just history, but for many people, this is an ongoing health issue, more than a chronic condition, one that continues to be life-threatening.
Right. Even now, it is a very serious health challenge. But of course, in the context of the play, it was absolutely a death sentence, and a death sentence without even knowledge, without medical lore. If someone tells you tragically that you have heart disease or that you have stage 4 cancer, you understand that your prognosis is limited, but there's a great body of medical knowledge, and people can say this can help you and this can remediate this and this may give you a little bit of time. That not even those small comforts were available. This in the beginning was entirely terra incognita. It was a new challenge for humankind. Now, writ large, one of the reasons that it's important that we do this play is because this is, in the largest sense, part of our history collectively, part of our culture's history, part of the ongoing history of expanding for all Americans the American dream, because it's through struggle that different groups throughout history who have been oppressed find their voice. And out of the tragedy, part of this play that is so moving is that out of the enormous tragedy of this and out of the shortcoming of society and the prejudice of society that prevented appropriate help moving and reacting. Look at how well we mobilized for the hurricane that was in town, that hit the East Coast recently, and compare that to how many years our government agencies did nothing about the AIDS crisis when it was affecting exponentially larger numbers of people.
President Reagan never even spoke the word
Never
AIDS.
spoke the word. Yeah.
When his friends from a lifetime in the film business were dying, he would not. Yes.
Michael, I want you to go back to the experience that you had with ACT UP and that energizing of community, people coming together. You said that you really felt empowered. Are there instances that you can correlate that experience with to anything else today, or was that just a unique moment?
Absolutely. I think that one life lesson I've learned is that being out is important because it puts a face on what can be a controversial issue. If people are asked to vote or make a choice about homosexuality, and if it's something to be discussed in schools, or if it's something to be voted on in terms of legislation or protection for oppressed groups, if you're given a yes or no possibility and you don't have a face to put to it, you'll probably vote no. But if you know someone, if you can say, this affects my friend, Michael Jones, then it's a different story. And I think that is what happened in the early 80s, is that we understood that this needed a face. And that until it had a face, it wouldn't be taken seriously. It wouldn't be taken, the absolute essential timeliness of it would not be understood. And so I think that's the correlation for me, is that it continues to be important to be out and be proud because of ongoing oppressiveness that we encounter in the gay and lesbian community.
And I think that continues for the world. That was a profound experience for me. I grew up in a very religious family and was just not aware of the gay community. It just wasn't a part. My mom and dad were ministers, although loving ones, not sometimes like the really extremists that we see now and so hateful. They truly carried a Christian message of love. But for me, to encounter friends, like Johnny said, to make so many friends in the theater and realize that, well, this was a difference for them. But it's a difference like they're blonde. Or they're right-handed, or what do you know, they like tiddlywinks. Okay, that's fine. It was just part of the experience of that. One of the things I remember about ACT UP that profoundly moved me was when they did the thing where they would take over the squares in front of buildings and leave chalk lines that represented literal numbers of bodies lost. So as the epidemic grew, each chalk outline represented, say, 500 more dead or 1,000 dead or that kind of thing. I remember the image of that from one thing in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. I can still see it in my head as I talk about it. And I just thought to myself, we talked about this a little one time, my friend Scott, I thought to myself, we have to do something. We, decent, caring people, these are our friends and our brothers and our sisters and our fellow citizens. It's not anybody else. I'm no longer mad at anybody else for doing anything else. We have to do something. And it really changed my life. And I think we have to tell that story over and over. For although we lived through it, there is always a new generation. We have to make that story come to life again.
And I think you really hit on something there. But I'm going to bring this out of New York for a moment and back to Oklahoma. What you said a moment ago, Michael, about putting a face on it, critically important. That was part of the playwright's effort as an activist, was to say these people are dying of AIDS. What happened, though, is that every kid who left Oklahoma or Texas or Ohio and moved to San Francisco or New York who died of AIDS, in the local paper, in the Daily Oklahoman, in the Tulsa World, died after a short illness, died of cancer. I mean, and so there was no face put to it. And don't you think that that's one of the reasons that even now there's a struggle here in understanding the magnitude of AIDS? My colleague, Reverend Dr. Kathy McCallie, talked about one year she did 153 funerals in Oklahoma City of people who died of AIDS, and most of those families would not acknowledge it.
Yeah. That was tragic and frustrating experience. Because you knew that it needed attention, and yet it didn't. You're exactly right. People would even sometimes at the person who was dying had a wish to share this, and against their own wishes, their family would call it something else. Mm-hmm. And also early on, there was just so little knowledge. There was so little understanding, which is what this play deals with, is operating in a void. How do you educate people about something for which you know nothing? It's a conundrum that Larry Kramer certainly struggled with, and that I think we struggled with in the early days of the AIDS crisis. I
want to look at how that plays out in our lives today, and certainly in the show. We're coming up on a break, but I'm loving this discussion, and I appreciate the honesty. And we'll be back right after this.
Hi, I'm Lorette Taylor, past chair of Cimarron Alliance. I joined the board because I believe in the vision and the work of this organization. We're working every day listening to the concerns of our community and helping to address those very concerns. I hope you will consider supporting Cimarron with a gift. Even $10 a month will help. Working together, we really can achieve equality for all gay Oklahomans. Please visit www.cimarronalliance.org and make your gift today.
Life can be a joyful adventure of spiritual discovery. At Church of the Open Arms, we believe in following in the way of Jesus as an inclusive, justice-seeking community, seeking the power of unconditional love that changes lives as we work together for alternatives to violence, as we seek racial harmony, full equality for LGBT persons, green, sustainable respect for the planet, ending sexism and patriarchy, and encouraging interfaith dialogue, Church of the Open Arms, UCC. Check us out at www.openarms.org.
Welcome back to Oklahoma Inside Out. For those of you, thank you. I'm so used to doing this show at a studio that when I hear applause, I'm always taken back. For those of you who are watching as opposed to just listening online, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll notice that our panel just expanded a little bit. Traffic is really bad this evening in downtown Oklahoma City. Thank you, Oklahoma City Thunder, for a large part of that. But it's really, timing couldn't have been more perfect. I'm delighted that you were able to join us. René Moreno is the director of this show, a Broadway veteran, has done great theater all over, regional theater throughout the United States, and certainly no stranger to working here. You directed August Osage County.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm delighted that you could join us.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I'm not going to try to bring you up to speed on everything we've been talking about, but I'm going to ask you, what was it that intrigued you about The Normal Heart that said, you know what, I'll come to Oklahoma City and do this show?
It's a play that, well, I moved to New York City in 1982, and so I lost my first friend in 1984, and there were so many people that I knew that were very good friends of mine, or teachers, or mentors, or actors, directors, choreographers, people that I had worked with. There were hundreds of people that I knew that got sick over the 10 years that I was there, and so many of them passed. And I was always pulled to this play. I wanted to direct this play. And because I just really recently, I was a witness to this event. I lived, and the AIDS plague started in 1981, and I was there in 1982. And so I really saw what it did, just decimated the arts community in particular in New York. And then, of course, it's all over the world, and it's moved everywhere and touched every type of people, just not gay men,
Whether we know it or not.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
So the thing that Michael said earlier that I think all of us, interestingly, feel is we are witnesses. So Michael said they are ghosts. I feel the light. I feel the spirit of our friends. And we are here to...
And a responsibility.
A responsibility.
Responsibility as an actor to
tell their
honor
story.
them and to tell their story.
That we are still here, and that this is a story that must not be forgotten.
And they existed. Yeah. There were people on this planet who had an impact on other people, and now they're just a name in some cases. So
and the fight still goes on.
Yes.
And I think that's Larry Kramer's point. There's no cure to AIDS. People are still getting ill. I think we have those of us that are gay have a real responsibility to the younger generation that don't have no idea that any of this happened, and I think about it's important that we speak as those of us that were there and those of us that are survivors. You're all survivors here. Are is honest and forthright with the generations coming up after us.
And we sadly in Oklahoma we are seeing an increase in new infections among young people, right. Also in older people, which is, yes. I could only surmise that must be from having lived life before AIDS, and then for the last 30 years living with either fear or the frustration of safe sex after what you had experienced, and then it's kind of like, oh well. But we're seeing it at the younger stage too. I talked to a doctor here recently, and she said, if one more 17-year-old kid comes into my office with a new HIV infection, I'm going to scream.
Right.
And so it is important to keep that message out there. We don't know the long-term effects of the medication.
That's right.
We don't know how the virus will morph as it has so many times. So I'm really happy that you brought that up. I think that there is an obligation in that. And as you were talking a moment ago, Jonathan, about how Larry Kramer would always have this anger thing. Mm-hmm. In the play, you as an actor with this character, is there some out of that anger, is there some hopefulness?
Yes. Oh, yes. I think so. I think it's implicit throughout the story, as it's kind of like we talked about this, like a murder mystery. You know, it starts out, you don't know who the murderer is, and then you see people dying and getting sick, and then as it evolves, you discover who done it, and then you try to extinguish that character. So there is a hopefulness, and there are glimmers of hope throughout the show. There are things that happen. And I think I think the effort is sometimes ugly, but the results happen. You know, you do see that they are, getting in Time and Newsweek and on all the national television shows and on Donahue, the voice is being heard. And I think that there is a hopefulness that comes out of that din of anger and shouting and fighting and I think it ends on a really hopeful note, which is unusual. I don't want to tell the ending because that will sort of, but it's a surprisingly hopeful ending, I think. So yeah, I do. I think it does have, it's a fascinating show to listen to and to watch. I don't think there will be anybody who sees it that walks out and goes, "Oh, I'm so depressed. I just, this was just misery."
Michael, what do you want to evoke in people as they leave the theater? What do you want them to feel?
Well, I want them to first of all have a deeper understanding of what happened, and I think that's important. As you said, this is ancient history to our younger gay people. That they have no institutional memory of this, no recollection. So I hope that they leave with an understanding that this is not something to be taken lightly or to be unwary of. And also the fact that there were people that came before them who made a difference in their lives today through their work at a very difficult time in our nation's history.
And a year from now, Don, when people are reflecting on this season, what are they going to say about The Normal Heart?
Well, I hope that what they say was that it was profoundly moving, that it led them to understanding. There's a great quote that's a favorite of mine that Thornton Wilder said. He said, "I believe the theater is the greatest of all art forms because it's the most immediate way a human being can show another human being what it means to be human." What I hope is that we increase understanding. What I hope is that we move like we always move inexorably in our country towards a more perfect union, that we recognize and celebrate equality and freedom and liberty and justice for all, that we remember the battles that we have fought so that we are not destined to repeat them, so that younger generation does not have to suffer the kind of losses that we suffered because of that.
René,
we will one day win this fight. We will one day win this fight.
You just heard from the people you're working with some really big hopes.
Yeah, I have them too.
Tell me about yours.
What's fantastic about the play is that it's universal in its theme. This is anybody's fight. This is anybody's fight against disease. This is anybody's fight against any horrible thing that the earth can give one. And I think one of the main messages that Kramer leaves you with is you don't be a victim. Stand up and fight. Recognize what's happening and do something about it, because it will, if it has to start with you, the individual, then it must be you.
I tell you, I think that each one of you has brought a very different perspective, and yet I love the fact that there is this commonality in everything that you're talking about, in the way that this one evening of theater can really impact people's lives. And there's a lot of work being done here in Oklahoma City, and I'm grateful that you all are a part of this, and I'm grateful that we have a chance to partner with you. We're almost out of time, but I want to say a very special thank you to René Moreno, Jonathan Beck Reed, Michael Jones, and Don Jordan. every best wish on this show and everything else that happens right here at City Rep. I also want to say thank you to our audience who joined us this evening, and I hope that everyone will make it a point to come see this show. We'll be back here again next week for another edition of Oklahoma Inside Out. We feature people, culture, situations, and things that are just very important to life in LGBT Oklahoma. We're particularly happy to have had this opportunity with these wonderful people serving Oklahoma City and equality in a unique and profound way. Our producer is Chris Moyer, associate producer Noah Pena. Our announcer is Lisa Pizzeri. Cimarron Alliance board co-chairs are Jeremy Hood and Randall Marsh. From all of us at Cimarron Alliance and Oklahoma Inside Out, I'm Scott J. Hamilton, thanking you for joining us. Until next time, hang on to the vision of a fair and just Oklahoma. Wonderful job.
Oklahoma Inside Out is a production of Cimarron Alliance, Central Oklahoma's preeminent LGBT advocacy and education organization. If you have a topic you would like to hear discussed, or a person who you would like to hear interviewed, please call 405-495-9300 or email oklahomainsideout@cimarronalliance.org. Please feel free to share the link to this broadcast with your friends.